We're with Scott Ritter and Larry Johnson. Larry Johnson is a former CIA analyst. He then went on to work at the State Department, specializing in counterterrorism. And he is the founder of Berg Associates, which is a consulting firm of sorts. And Larry's fans who are tuning in probably are familiar with that. But why don't you just start by saying hello, Larry, and what is Berg Associates exactly?
Berg Associates is a conglomeration. It's basically now just a former DEA money laundering expert and myself. We do financial investigations. I also spent 24 years scripting counterterrorism exercises for the special operations community within the U.S. military. I held top secret compartmented clearances up until 2016.
All right. And as your position, are you taking a pro-money laundering position or an anti-money laundering position?
I only get into the pro-money laundering when I forget to check my pockets when I toss it into the washing machine. But otherwise, very much against it.
All right. Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah.
So Larry and Scott have been publicly disagreeing lately, and things got very heated. So I had to figure out a way to bring these guys together without things getting out of control. And I actually have a secret weapon, which we'll get to in a moment. But I think a lot of folks are very interested in the latest developments in Ukraine. And so I have a thought, and I haven't mentioned this to either one of you two, but I know you both stay up on it, so I'm pretty sure you can handle it. Before we get into the debate or the discussion or the hostility or the make-up sex or whatever it might be, wherever it might go, can I ask each of you to spend 2 minutes or less giving us the latest in Ukraine as you know it to be? Would that be all right? Can we start with you, Scott? How about that?
2 minutes or less.
Yes.
Russia's winning. Ukraine's losing. NATO's embarrassed. The United States is humiliated. This fight is going to take longer than many people anticipated. And the consequences of Russia's victory is going to be extremely dire for Ukraine and equally dire for NATO and the United States. And I think will set in motion a chain of events that will ultimately alter the geopolitical reality of the world as we know it today.
Wow, you stuck to the time limit. What a pro you are. Larry, I will now make the same request of you, kind sir.
Basically what he said. The only, let's call it different point of opinion, and I'm not sure what, I'm not sure how long it will go on because the Russia's ability, what it's achieved in grinding so far, gets down to a question I don't have the answer to, and we'll discuss it later, whether or not Russia is the supported commander in this operation or whether Russia is the supporting commander with respect to Donetsk and Luhansk. But against this, the Western economies are collapsing. They're going to collapse. This notion that an inflation fueled by printing too much money ignores all the shortages that are cropping up in the supply streams. It's going to be devastating to the West. We're not going to be able to lend a dime to Ukraine, I think, within 6 months.
Okay, great. And let's just play it by ear. When we're done discussing what you guys have been disagreeing about, if it seems like, there's still time and interest, we can get into the current situation a little bit more. No need to worry about it, though. So basically, the controversy has been that Scott's analysis has been evolving, and some people have been criticizing him for it, including Larry. I think some of it is quibbling over semantics, but some of it is also a substantive difference of opinion, difference of take on what the facts are as well. So let's try to sort all that out. I guess the central issue is, how much does the U.S. aid and training that's being provided really matter? And I would like to show a clip with Gonzalo Lira talking about this, because he's also one of the people that have been criticizing Scott. And the other reason is Larry mentioned him in his recent post as being sort of a kindred spirit. Not that they agree on everything, but in a certain sense, they're agreeing on what the topic of our conversation is. So let's just take a look at him and start there.
These people keep insisting that the West, the United States, that NATO can keep on resupplying Ukraine endlessly. It's not true. It's not true at all, because see, you can maybe buy and manufacture the weapons and send them, but there's a great difference between sending the weapons and actually getting them and putting them on the front and using them against the opponent. If the opponent is denying you the ability to do that with these imported weapons, then the weapons are, for all intents and purposes, useless. The weapons are actually a death trap, because if you're handling these weapons, you're going to get hit by a missile.
Okay, and here is a quote from Larry's recent post. This podcast is also audio only on Spotify, so I'm going to read it for the benefit of that audience. It says, Scott Ritter sees the training of Ukrainian troops in Poland and Germany as a critical variable that could really hurt the Russians. Training reinforcements on new technology might be a potential game changer if the situation on the ground in Ukraine was static. It is not. Russia is grinding down the entrenched Ukrainian forces in the Donbas. So there's that word game changer, and I think that's kind of the source of some of the disagreement. Scott, what is your response to that?
I stand by everything I've said. It's a game changer. And one of the reasons why I'll continue insist on is that the Russians agree it's a game changer. The president of the Donetsk Republic just yesterday, I believe, in speaking about the current status of events, et cetera, made a telling statement. He said, because Ukraine has received and asked for and received heavy weapons from NATO, and that these weapons have made it to the front lines and are killing Russians and DNR troops and LNR troops, this war will not stop. The special military operation will not stop once we reclaim our borders. But we are now compelled to move on. He also said that this moving on will include the seizure of Odessa, implying that had Ukraine not received these heavy weapons, that Odessa may not have been on the agenda. My point is, none of this means that Ukraine is winning or that Russia is losing, but it is literally a game changer. The game has changed. The war is long. And now, Larry and I agree, Larry, we don't know how long this war is going to be. But one of the key players in this, whether he's the supporting commander or the supported commander, has said publicly, and remember, he wouldn't be saying this had he not coordinated his statements with the Russians and Lugansk. He has said that the special military operation will probably not conclude until the end of this year. That means we have 5 more months of combat, of grinding down. I would bet my paycheck that had NATO not provided these weapons, had NATO not provided the training, this war would not be going on for 5 months. I would bet my paycheck that if Ukraine was limited to the weapons and resources it started this conflict with, this conflict would be over. The only reason why this conflict is continuing is that Ukraine has received these weapons, not just the weapons, but money, logistics, intelligence, things that allow this conflict to be prolonged and things that allow this conflict, frankly speaking, to be more costly to Russia. And this is why, again, a Russian parliamentarian just came out and said he doesn't think Ukraine is going to survive as a nation state. And if you remember going in, Putin, one of Putin's big things was to respect the territorial integrity of Ukraine. But Ukraine has changed the game by accepting these weapons. And now Ukraine is going to pay a game-changing price. I think Larry and I agree that the Russians are winning. And I think Larry and I agree that the Russians are winning in a very impressive manner. I'm duly impressed with the Russians. But I think I give the Ukrainians more credence when it comes to their ability to fight the Russians. I mean, hats off to them. Not the Nazis. They all can die in hell, and the mercenaries, they can hang in hell. But the average Ukrainian soldier who's paying the heaviest price, they're fighting. They're hooking and jabbing. They're in the trenches. They're dying. They're killing Russians. They're being killed by Russians. And I salute them as warriors. because I won't denigrate what they're doing. They're putting up a hell of a fight. But that fight should have been over. As the Ukrainians have said, we're out of ammunition for our Soviet-era artillery. We're out of ammunition. We got no 122 millimeter ammunition left, and that was the majority of their tubes. They have some 152 millimeter ammunition, running out of that too. The only thing they got is the 155 millimeter howitzers provided by the United States, France, Great Britain, Belgium, Norway. They've got hundreds of these. And Gonzalo Lira is just dead wrong. Dead wrong. He couldn't be more wrong. Ask the Russians who are being hit by the 155 millimeter shells fired from French Caesar self-propelled howitzers, from American M777 towed howitzers. They're on the front lines. They made it with ammunition, and they're firing thousands of rounds a day at the Russians and the Russian civilians. So Gonzalo Lira is dead wrong, 100% wrong. That's what happens when a lifestyle coach tries to get involved in military analysis. I respect Larry's opinion because he's been there, he's done that, he's got the T-shirt. Gonzalo, take him off the playing board, man. He doesn't belong here.
All right. Well, I noticed on Larry's blog that he expressed a desire for you and Gonzalo to patch things up at some point. So I'm not sure that doesn't sound like that's in the cards.
Ain't gonna happen.
All right. So let's stick to this particular love fest for now and not worry about Gonzalo. So Larry, how much of this is about, quibbling over the meaning of game changer versus how much of this is actually a disagreement on the specifics?
Well, I'm not sure it'd be called a quibble over game changer. I first thought say that. I thought it was a disconnect with what he had been saying before, because clearly the Russians were winning the war, or not just the Russians, the militias in the Donbass, both the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics, they were advancing. It was more methodical because of how dug in the Ukrainians were. But my view of a game changer was something that was going to alter that reality on the ground. I don't think it's that. However, I understand. I think Scott had that within the context of game changer was by the United States and NATO continuing to try to put these weapon systems into Ukraine and sustain or extend the war. It increases the risk of a war between Russia and NATO. And yes, I would consider that a game changer. The reality is that I know I'm talking to my friends who are still in military intelligence. US intelligence, they have been they have been relying upon, at least from the CIA standpoint, the intelligence that they're getting from the Ukrainian general staff and liaison sources. It's pure crap. They're just passing along propaganda. And what really sickens me is that our so-called intelligence community, the ultimate oxymoron, is putting that stuff out and feeding it to policymakers as if it's reality. And it is not. It used to be that you could count on Defense Intelligence Agency and maybe NSA to come in with some technical means, and with the folks doing the overhead photography, the imagery, that would actually provide some hard data to correct the picture. And they have not been. There has been this pressure to really not tell the story. So when we step back and look at it objectively, here was Ukraine with 3 times the size of personnel available, and the Russians went in with less than that. I know that I think I made a mistake early on, assuming that the Russians were the supported commander in this operation. And supported commander is a term within the military that means we've got different generals from different geographic areas. For example, the supported one is who gets all the support. He gets to call in what resources, what he needs. All
right. I'd like to see if I can get you two to speak a little bit more specifically, though, about how the value of the particular weapons and aid, or how you assess the value. Here you are. This is another excerpt from your blog post, Larry. When you provide intelligence on Russian troop movements, locations, or plans, there is an assumption that the recipients of that intelligence will be able to do something to hurt the Russians.
Right.
In my view, sharing intelligence with Ukraine is an effort in futility. an empty gesture that will not change anything on the ground. So it seems to me you're basically saying it's useless or close to useless, and I think that's a substantive disagreement that you and Scott have. Am I right?
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, the reason I'd say it's useless, okay, let's say we're going to pass the Ukrainians. Here's the information, the geo-coordinate location of these Russian units. Okay, what are the Ukrainians going to do with it? Well, the idea would be able to put up a drone to be able to fly over to actually pinpoint the location to make sure you had it right. The problem that the Ukrainians have is the Russian air defense systems and electronic warfare systems are shooting down and disabling those drones. Alternatively, send forward a fixed-wing aircraft, maybe to bomb it. Again, those aircraft are getting shot down. Maneuver artillery in position, that's possible, but what I've seen is the artillery that's being maneuvered is primarily going against civilian locations in the net. It's not softening up military targets, unlike what the Russians are doing to the Ukrainians, where they're just pounding them mercilessly in these defended positions.
Okay. Scott, what do you think?
Look, from a strategic standpoint, I think Larry's correct. The intelligence isn't changing the outcome on the ground. But operationally and tactically, I have to disagree. You know, the Russians, first of all, are firing 50 to 60,000 artillery rounds a day. We fired 60,000 artillery rounds in all of Desert Storm. Yeah. So we're talking about an order of magnitude here that's just mind-boggling that the average American can't even begin to wrap their head around. What we can wrap our heads around is 5,000 to 6,000 rounds a day. That's the sort of the sustainment we would do. And that's what the Ukrainians are doing. We have to understand that they are pulling a lanyard 5,000 to 6,000 times a day. And those shells are going downrange and they're hitting something. Yes, but I think Larry has identified that dozens of these shells are landing in civilian areas, especially Donetsk right now. But that still leaves 5,940 rounds going somewhere. And it's not just artillery. The Ukrainians fly 30 to 40 combat sorties aircraft a day, Su-25s, Su-27s, MiG-29s. A lot of these get shot down, but many of them, especially the Su-25s, are delivering ordnance. They don't deliver ordnance the way A-10s did in Afghanistan in a threat-free environment by hovering over a Taliban position and riding them. They do it the Russian way, which is recognizing you're in a high air defense risk area. You fly in low, you have your targeting computer. When you get to a certain geolocation on the ground, you arch up until you get the indicator and you salvo your rockets off, you turn and you fly home. And they're doing that 30 to 40 times a day. Those rockets are hitting something. They're hitting a target that's been developed by Western intelligence, says, here are Russians, go and kill them. They're MI-8 helicopters. They flew a 4-flight a rocket attack against the Russians yesterday. They have drones. A lot of their drones are getting shot down. A lot of other drones are getting jammed. But they do have drones that get over, make it over, and they direct highly accurate 155 millimeter artillery shells onto Russian positions. The bottom line is Russians are dying. They're dying. So it is having an impact. And we know they've used the Excalibur round. Now, some people say, oh, it's GPS jammed and all that. Well, Larry, you know and I know the technology ain't perfect. That shit, excuse me, bad language.
Oh, we're on the internet. You can go nuts.
Great. Stuff doesn't work. That's just life. And sometimes you can have people trying to jam you and you're able to get through, especially if you have, for instance, American intelligence identifying real-time gaps in Russian coverage, finding a seam. And so on occasion, a Ukrainian drone gets over a Russian brigade area and directs artillery fire on them, destroying equipment, killing Russians. Does this change the outcome of the war? Absolutely not. Russia's still going to win. But is it killing Russians? And the answer is yes. And the question that I didn't have an answer to until today is, what is Russia's pain threshold? Because Russia only committed 200,000 troops or so to this fight. there's no doubt Russia suffered casualties. Not nearly as many as the Ukrainians have said, but far more many than we know of. Russia has admitted 5,500 dead. I bet you that number is close to 15,000 nowadays. They've suffered a large number of wounded. Now, they brought in 40 to 60,000 replacements. And so they still have a high level of combat capacity. And I think their casualty level is shrinking now that they've achieved this overwhelming fire supremacy. I mean, when you're putting 60,000 rounds down range and only receiving 6,000 back, you're doing okay, and you're going to get this. It's going to stop being a grinding like this, and it's going to start being a grinding like this, and then it's going to be a grinding like this, and then there's going to be nothing left of the Ukrainians. But right now, thanks to the intelligence and the weaponry provided by the United States and NATO, Ukraine is killing Russians. That's just a statement of fact, flat out statement of fact. And sometimes they're killing senior Russians. We know that the Excalibur round has been used to take out battalion and brigade command posts, and has resulted in the deaths of lieutenant colonels, and maybe some generals. Again, it's not going to change the war, but it is having an impact. I mean, when you lose a general officer, that's an impact. That's a game changer. When you lose a colonel, that's a problem. It doesn't change anything. The Russians are going to win, but it is lengthening this conflict. And the other aspect of game changer is that the game doesn't change in terms of just what's happening to the Russians. As the president of the Donetsk Republic said, by killing Russians, you've pissed them off. I mean, Russia, understands war. They wear big boy pants. They know they're going to take casualties. But for NATO and the United States to provide Ukraine with weaponry for the sole purpose of killing Russians, this weaponry is not going to change the outcome of the war. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows that. So they're providing it for the sole purpose of killing Russians. Now you're going to pay a price. And the price that's going to be paid, I believe, will ultimately be the dismemberment of Ukraine as a viable nation state. And that's a game changer, because this could have ended with a reduced Ukraine, still a viable nation state. I think Ukraine's finished. I think they're done. I think Zelensky will not survive as the president of Ukraine. He's either going to have to flee or die. Again, the president of the Donetsk Republic said that he's a war criminal for allowing these NATO weapons to shell Donetsk. Zelensky's responsible. He's now a war criminal. He will be arrested if caught, and he will be brought on trial as a war criminal. So that's a game changer. Game changer doesn't mean you lose the game. It's as I said before, Jeff, it's like if I started a quarterback for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the Super Bowl, they were playing another team. They're preparing to play Scott Ritter, a 60-year-old man with neuropathy and arthritis. So they have a defense set up to handle my moves. But I go down at halftime and they bring in Tom Brady. That's a game changer. It doesn't mean that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are going to win, but the game has changed. All right.
We get it. Look, you don't even know this, but game changer has been one of my favorite phrases for years. And actually, it's already on the U.S. Tour of Duty website to describe something. So we get it. So Larry, I'm sure that you have a nuanced response that you're prepared to give. But before you do, let me just ask you a yes/no question. Would you agree the answer is yes to this question? As a result of the U.S. and NATO aid and training, Russia had to make some key and possibly costly changes. Is that fair to say the answer is yes?
I disagree, Mel.
Not at all. Wow, I'm surprised.
I think this outcome was frankly determined within the first 3 or 4 days. Mm-hmm. Once Russia started eviscerating the ability of the command and control of Ukrainian forces. I mean, take for example, for the first 2-3 weeks, I'm losing a little track of time, you had this Russian column stalled north of Kiev. It was variously described as 40 kilometers or 40 miles. Now, as Scott knows, that's the difference between 24 miles and 40 miles. So which was it? Well, without quibbling over the actual distance, the interpretation, I know this for a fact, that was being given in the Joint Chiefs of Staff and to EUCOM was, oh, this is a Russian screw up. They've run out of fuel. They can't keep their people resupplied. All right. What happened to that column in that week and a half that's sitting there? If I gave Scott a battalion of guys with Javelin missiles, Scott would tear the hell out of that column. And he wouldn't even have to, he'd only have to get 600 meters away. But here, the United States is looking at this. You don't get a single fixed wing attack of any significance by Ukrainian Air Force. You get no rotary wing attack with missiles. You get no cruise missile strike. You get no artillery strikes. You get no armor strikes. That right away told me that lots of training from NATO and lots of money that it was invested. They didn't actually have maneuverable ground forces that could take advantage of this sitting duck. If you do not believe that a 24 to 40 mile column is a sitting duck ready to be slaughtered, then I go back to some of the things Scott has said about people they don't understand military. So that right away caught my attention. Now, the thing I think we didn't appreciate, and I think Scott has been important in elaborating on this, is how much entrenching the Ukrainians did over the last 8 years after they invaded the Donbass. And yet, it's important also to remember that the Ukrainian army failed to defeat the militias in Donetsk and Luhansk back in 2014, 2015. Which brings me to sort of my final point is I have come to the belief that the lead for the battles in Luhansk and Donetsk is primarily up to those militias with Russia providing support, not Russia as the supporting. And I also believe that more of the casualties are being taken by those militias than by the Russians.
All right, I'm not Scott. I'm failing to get him on board with the game changer thing. We're trying to brand it here, but it's not working. But that's good. It's honest. Larry is he's quite extreme here. Maybe not necessarily wrong, but let's not shy away from it. And I respect that he's not shying away. He came right out and said here the howitzers are a meaningless gesture. Is he? I'm sorry. Go ahead, Scott. You want to say something more? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
As me, I think the entire war in Ukraine is a game changer, a global game changer on par with anything that happened in World War II.
At least we got him to use the word game changer.
Game changers. Changes to the game such that the game can never be played the same way again.
All right. Whoever can guess where that's from wins the prize.
No, you got me.
Scott already gives up. Our producer, Peter, you can play too. Let's play it one more time. Where's this from?
Game changers. Changes to the game such that the game can never be played the same way again.
No.
Is that voice at all familiar?
Yeah, but I'm deaf. So, what good is that going to do me?
That's James Spader. When he was in an episode of The Office.
Oh, okay.
And, he comes in and he's like, trying to inspire everybody to come up with the great ideas. And, don't be afraid to be weird, he tells them.
Brainstorm some innovations. Don't be afraid to get weird with it.
All right. So don't get afraid. That's the same advice I have for you guys. Don't be afraid to get a little weird. All right, Scott, what do you, I have to break, the tension a little bit, before you
go. There's no tension. Look, I think Larry and I can agree on the following. We are sitting thousands of miles away from where the action is taking place. When I look at my desk, I don't have a telephone line that Vladimir Putin answers when I pick it up, or anybody else. I'm a prisoner of data that is being filtered to me through a variety of sources. Some of this data is pure crap. Some of it's solid gold. Some of it's in between. And it's incumbent upon me and Larry to use our various bias filters to work through it, assemble data, and then interpret it of the best way we can. So, if we come at this problem from a different perspective, a different analytical mindset, that doesn't mean that he's right, I'm wrong, or I'm right, he's wrong. It means that two professionals are examining an extraordinarily difficult problem, and they're coming up with slight variations, slight differences. I mean, but the bottom line is, I think we can say that Larry and I both agree that Russia is winning, Ukraine is losing, and nothing's going to change that outcome. Now we can sit there and we can have professional disagreements about the chaff that's in there among the wheat. How effective is the M777 howitzer? Well, how the hell do we know? I mean, I'm not on the ground. I'm not with the forward deployed battery. I'm not in Warsaw receiving the intelligence and linking it to the Ukrainians. I don't even know if that's taking place. I've been told it is, but am I being lied to, as Larry said? We have the U.S. intelligence community lying to us on purpose to shape data. We have the Ukrainian Ministry of Information, pure propaganda. And we have the Russians being as reticent as Russia always is about data. So we got to take the tea leaves, throw it on the ground, and try and read what's going on. My feeling is, based upon the information I've received, same information Larry's received, so we look at it with different sets of eyeballs, that at least some of the M777 howitzers have made it to the front lines.
Yep.
And some of those that have made it to the front lines have fired artillery rounds towards the Russians, and some of those rounds have had an impact, i.e. they've killed or wounded or destroyed equipment on the Russian side. How many? I don't know. Of any of that. I can't tell you how many howitzers have fired. I can't tell you how many rounds they fired. I can't tell you how many targets they've hit, and I can't tell you how many people they've killed. All I can say is, when I see a statement that just blanket, like Gonzalo, Lira, saying, they ain't never going to make it to the front, Gonzalo, you're wrong. They've already made it to the front. They ain't never going to fire around. Gonzalo, you're wrong. They have fired around. They ain't never going to kill any Russians. Wrong again, Gonzalo. They've killed Russians. And we can say the same thing with the French howitzers, same thing with the Norwegian howitzers. We can say the same thing for any weapon system that's been introduced in significant numbers. One thing we know is that the Russians do not have not exhibited the ability to seal the border of Ukraine. That has not happened. Stuff is pouring in. Russia does not have perfect intelligence about where everything is located. They have good intelligence. Hell, we see the explosions every day. They're blowing stuff up. Good job, Russia, but they're not blowing everything up. And again, when Ukraine says we are out of Soviet-era ammunition, and NATO says we don't have any more Soviet-era ammunition to send, that implies that the 5,000 to 6,000 rounds that are being fired every day by the Ukrainians, a good proportion of that is coming from NATO. It means it's successfully crossed the border, successfully made it to the front lines, successfully integrated with a tactical unit that is successfully engaging the Russians. The Russians themselves speak of artillery duels. The Russians themselves, when they show their artillery forces firing, the first thing they say is that we have to rapidly move in, we have to rapidly fire, and then we have to rapidly get the hell out of the way. That's the Russians. Why? Because they say the Ukrainians have counter battery radars, which are detecting the rounds, and the Ukrainians are prepared to fire counter battery rounds. And the Ukrainians have shown drone footage of Russian units that weren't fast enough and are destroyed because Ukrainian counter battery got them. Now, I would imagine that the number of times a day that the Ukrainians are this successful could probably be counted on one hand, maybe one finger. It's not that often. Whereas the Russians, on the other hand, given the fact that they've saturated the front lines with artillery and detection capabilities, I bet you they're catching Ukrainians out an awful lot. And so the Ukrainians are losing the artillery duel. They're losing more artillery pieces than they're destroying of the Russians, which means that unless they receive more artillery, they're going to come back to the same conclusion that they reached before they received any artillery, which is Russia has destroyed everything. This is why it's absurd when you see the Ukrainians put their wish list out there. They want 1,000 artillery tubes. The United States Army and the United States Marine Corps active components don't have 1,000 tubes all combined. So the Ukrainians are asking NATO to give them the total equivalent artillery inventory of the entire active United States military ground forces, Army and Marine Corps combined. They're smoking dope. The same thing. They want 500 tanks. Man, if you took all the tanks in the British Army and all the tanks in the German Army, you don't get 500 tanks. So Ukraine wants more tanks sent to them than the British and the Germans combined. Again, they're smoking dope. They're asking NATO to strip bare their armory, their inventory, to help them in a losing fight against Russia. And you know what? If NATO wants to do that, so be it, because all that's going to happen is Russia's going to destroy all that equipment too. It may take longer. The price Russia's going to pay is higher. But again, the price Ukraine's going to pay is ultimately the highest, because I don't see Ukraine ending this conflict as a viable nation state. I see Ukraine being fundamentally dismembered. I see their political leadership being annihilated, either through exile or trial. And I see their military suffering casualties that a Western military hasn't suffered since World War II.
I see our producer, Pedro, has boldly inserted himself into the broadcast. What's on your mind, Pedro?
Well, I wanted to ask these two gentlemen if they could comment on what's been happening lately, the last few days or so, with the seemingly increased number of shellings going into Donetsk and into the civilian areas. Do you know what kind of artillery is being used? Is it the Soviet, or is it some of the new stuff that's made it to the front line? And why the increase now?
Well, I'm not sure of what source it is, but I think it illustrates a point that Scott was alluding to, that Russia, I would anticipate if Russia had complete control of the area, that the counter battery fire on that would be immediate. So what we don't know is whether that is mortar fire, or if it is actually artillery rounds like the 155, or if it is something else from a Grad system. The fact, though, that it's targeting only civilian areas, that is not the militias and the Russians are not embedding themselves around hospitals, schools, and in civilian areas as a means of fighting. They're going out and advancing, unlike what the Ukrainians do. But the Ukrainians, I think this is an act of desperation, if nothing else, to try to elicit another response. They're hoping that Russia at some point will make a mistake so egregious. I mean, they've been trying over and over and over to trap Russia as a gross human rights violator, and every time they do it, blows up in their face, whether it's, the massacre at Bucha that allegedly took place and that, clearly the Ukrainians were involved with. But it does highlight the fact that, Russia does not have perfect control of the ground, and that these artillery batteries or mortar rounds or Grad rockets, whatever they are still able to reach civilian areas. That said, it's not wiping out. It's not like the bombing of Dresden by the United States in World War II, where the entire city burns and it's gone. It's killing a few civilians. If nothing else, it goes back to, I think, to a point Scott also made. It's pissing the Russians off.
Well, the fact that the Russians aren't able to stop this, and it's going on seemingly day after day and increasingly so, is it possible that it is the new Western artillery that can be assembled quickly, take a shot, and be disassembled and moved quickly, and that's why the Russians can't target them? Well,
actually, this has been going on for 8 years. The only thing that's different is we're paying attention to it now. It's been going on for 8 years.
I'll jump in. One, we keep saying the Russians, but in this case, it's the Donetsk People's Republic. It's the city of Donetsk that's being shelled. They have provided physical evidence, and again, I didn't collect it, so I can't sit here and say with 100% veracity this is exactly what happened. But they've provided shrapnel that points to both French artillery rounds, given the nomenclature and the serial numbers, 155 millimeter rounds fired by the Caesar guns, and American artillery rounds fired by the M777s. They've also shown the BM-21 122 millimeter multiple launch rocket system, the Grads that Larry spoke of. So you're seeing a number of rounds hit. Now, it's not that the Russians aren't doing anything. I will tell you that, first of all, the Ukrainians have a very lethal anti-air defense system in place. right now. The Russians know this. Their airplanes fly very strict tactics that minimize the exposure. You don't see Russian planes hovering at 20,000 feet over the battlefield because the S-300 system will get them. You see the Russians coming in very low, doing the same thing the Ukrainians do. Come low, fire off the rockets, peel, and get away. They don't hover around the battlefield. They don't hang around the battlefield because the Ukrainians have saturated the battlefield, just like the Russians have with anti-air capability. That's another thing Americans don't know because we've never fought a war like this. Our air forces have never had to deal with this level of air defense. So the Ukrainians are able to bring the artillery in, get it situated, and then, for instance, the case of the BM-21, it's just 1 or 2 launchers with about 12 rockets each, and they salvo those things off, and then they get the hell out of Dodge. They run. That's hard to target. Even if I had a dedicated counter battery with dedicated guns, by the time I've calculated the arc, transferred that into a battery command system, and I've adjusted my guns, and I'm firing, a good artillery system will have moved. And so the rounds are hitting where they ain't. The M777 with a good crew can displace within 2 or 3 minutes of firing. That's pretty good. Again, you have to be very on with your thing. Now, I'm not saying the Ukrainians are that skilled. I doubt there's many Ukrainian crews that can meet the 2 to 3 minute displacement standard. But also remember, the Russians, we don't know, when counter battery means that you have artillery that's not pounding the Ukrainians. You have dedicated artillery standing back, waiting for something to happen along a 1,600 kilometer front line. This is a big war. This is a lot of territory. This ain't, being fought in your backyard. This is a huge amount of territory that we're talking about. So, there are seams. There are seams in the coverage, seams in everything that the U.S. intelligence is collecting, and they're doing it real time. That's another thing that wouldn't happen if this was a war. You wouldn't have RC-135s hovering. They'd be shot down. You wouldn't have satellites above that they'd be taken out or blinded. The U.S. right now is in a threat-free environment surrounding Ukraine with all of their great intelligence collection platforms, and they're loading it down to an intelligence analysis center, I believe in Warsaw, that's sitting there looking over the data real time, and then they have secure transmission to their Ukrainian counterparts, and they're saying, hey, if you want to fly your Su-25 today, here's a seam in the air defense. We're downloading to show you the gaps now, and they load that in and they fly it. They do the same thing with the artillery. So it's impossible to say, I think it's wrong to criticize the Russians when artillery rounds are hitting, because this is war. It's a big war. There's a lot of Ukrainians. There's still a lot of Ukrainian artillery tubes. Remember, they're firing 5,000 to 6,000 rounds a day. And if you fire more than 4 rounds, you're going to be located and killed. That means that they probably have around 500-600 artillery tubes in action per day. This is the Ukrainians. You can't stop it all. So they're firing it. And now we come down to, why are they hitting Donetsk? This war has been going on for 8 years. And this isn't a war of honorable combatants. The Ukrainians are scum. The Ukrainians in Donetsk and the Donbass are the worst kind of scum. These are nationalist scum who are seeking to punish ethnic Russians. They have no qualms about blowing up civilians. Remember Poroshenko, the former president of Ukraine, when he gave a speech, and he said, while Ukrainian children are going to Sunday school and enjoying the day, your Russian kids are going to be in the basement cowering because we're going to pound you every single day. And that's the mindset of Ukrainian nationalist scum that have these artillery pieces, and they're shooting into Donetsk, not for any military purpose, just to say, screw you, Russia, screw you, Russians. We're going to kill as many of you while we can. And this is why the president of the Donetsk People's Republic, and indeed the commander of their army, says, we know who fired the rounds. We know who you are, and we're going to catch you. When we catch you, you're going to trial. And when we find you guilty, we're going to shoot you because you're a war criminal. And they are war criminals.
I wanted to ask Scott, or actually sort of challenge Scott about something that has not come up in this conversation so far. But, there's a lot of back and forth online in different forums responding to Scott's so-called switcheroo. And this is one of the things that has come up multiple times. And that is that Scott has made a big deal about how much aid the U.S. is providing to Ukraine. But a lot of folks are saying, yeah, but it's not all going to weapons. And I think that's a fair point. So I don't want to go on too much about the specifics. People can look it up on their own. But I think we're up to around 50 billion or more. There was just another billion within the past couple of days. But I'm looking at the Appropriations Act when it was at 40 billion. And just to give people a sense of how it's divided up, let me just read a little bit of it. 6 billion for security assistance to Ukraine, 9 billion for replenishment of U.S. stocks, 3.9 billion for mission support, Defense Production Act, 600 million to mitigate industrial base constraints for faster missile production, 500 million to procure critical munitions to increase the stocks of the Defense Department, 2 million for technical and regulatory support in Ukraine's nuclear regulatory agency, 900 million for refugee support services, and it goes on and on. So, Scott, you think that's a fair point? And also, I want Larry to comment on this too. I don't know exactly how much of this actually gets spent in the way it's supposed to, but at the very least, it seems like we should start with how it's supposed to be spent.
Well, I'll just quickly say this. What I said is that we have provided we had a $40 billion aid package, which when combined with previous aid brought the total amount of aid to $53 billion. Mm-hmm. And I said that the total Russian defense expenditure for 2021 was $64 billion. So that, and then of that, when you take away pensions and all that, it actually comes down to about $43 billion for actual Ministry of Defense expenditures. And I said, we have provided Ukraine with more assistance than Russia spends on its entire military in 1 year. That is a 100% factual statement. People chose to parse it down. Okay, and I know Larry didn't do this, so I have no problem saying this. Fuck you, people. You're talking to a professional here, not a goddamn amateur. Okay, I don't go on shows like this and say things half-cocked, half-assed. So kiss my ass. And I hate to get mad like this, but I'm fed up with it. I have parsed down the numbers. I won't get into the boring details, but of the money we provided, about 7.5 to 8 billion of it is for military aid and operational support to the Ukrainians. That's not stuff that gets embezzled. That's not stuff that goes into people's pockets. That's guns, ammunition, and the fuel, the logistics necessary to get to the front. That's a lot of money. How much money? How does it make a difference? Let's parse down the Russian budget, which I've done, by the way, all you Gonzalo Lira wannabes. And it comes down to about $7.5 to $8 billion of munitions procurement and operational support. It's the exact same thing. So we have provided Ukraine in 5 months, less than 5 months, the total amount of weapons and operational support that Russia spends on its entire goddamn military in 1 year. Challenge that fact, people. You can't. So back the fuck off. I know what I'm talking about. I'm tired of Gonzalo Lira type wannabes getting involved in this debate. This is a serious debate here. This is life and death. This is real. This isn't a place for lifestyle coaches to insert themselves. If you're going to play the game, at least have the courtesy of either saying up front, this is what I bring to the table, or I bring nothing to the table. I'm going to sit back and let people who do bring something to the table talk about it. There you go, Jack. Now you got me mad.
I knew somebody was going to get you mad. I didn't think it was going to be me. And I'm glad I asked it as a question. I hope you think it's okay to ask it as a question.
I'm not mad at you. It's been a long day, and I've been doing these interviews. This is the first time I had a chance to actually blow off some steam, so I apologize.
No, it's okay. But whether it's me or anybody else, I think we should make a distinction between claiming that, the money isn't going to be put to use that makes a difference and just asking the question. I think somebody who's interested in how the money how it breaks down is asking a very good question, actually. So, Larry, what's your take on it? What's going to happen to the weapons in particular? We were talking on the phone yesterday, and you mentioned the black market. I think our audience would probably like to hear about that.
So aid is like rain. And on any terrain, you can get an amount of rainfall to come to such a level that the ground can't absorb anymore. And I don't care how much rain you keep pouring on there, it's not going, you get to a stage where it is as wet as it can be. The same applies with military aid and military spending. I personally, I worked with the Joint Special Operations Command in the U.S. Military Special Operations Theater going back to 1989. And the transformation that's taken in that place over the last 32 years, 33 years, they keep getting more money and more money and more money, and building and expanding and building. Doesn't make them better, just makes them bigger and with more crap and with more personnel. And with now hundreds of thousands of people read into what used to be a compartmented program that only had 5,000 people read into it. So Ukraine doesn't have any magic powers, and I don't care. We keep pouring, as Scott correctly noted, they're getting the amount of aid that Russia spent on its entire military. They don't have the ability to absorb that. There's no magic wand. You hit somebody on the head, and all of a sudden they know how to drive a tank or fire a howitzer or operate a helicopter. These training takes time. The military is a training organization by its nature. It's always training to fight, but that training doesn't take place in a day. Some things are easier to teach than others, like how to properly shave yourself, a young Marine, learning how to shave. And as I learned from a drill instructor buddy of mine, he always used to look for the kid with the worst acne in the group, take him into the shower, shave him because he'd be bleeding like a stuck pig. And after that, none of the other troops wanted to get shaved. So it's just, the point is that we can throw all this aid at them, but it doesn't have magical powers. It requires personnel who have been trained and who are knowledgeable and know how to use it. And that can only come with time. And what's happening in this process is both the people from the Donbass as well as the Russians are killing a lot of the Ukrainians that have that experience, and just taking some fresh-faced kid off the streets in Lviv or in Kiev and throwing them into battle doesn't make them instant warriors, no matter how much Call of Duty they've played online.
Right. But I'm asking if it's even worse than what you're saying. In other words, you're talking in terms of it being limited as to how effective it can be. I'm asking, is it even worse than that in the sense that the money is going to be spent corruptly, it's going to wind up in the wrong hands, and the weapons are going to wind up in the wrong hands? Can either of you give us some information about that?
No, it absolutely is. So that's, look, one of the things we did within the consulting business is we looked at cigarette smuggling. We went against Philip Morris for cigarette smuggling, and we worked closely with a cigarette smuggler in the Ukraine. So you know exactly how that black market world works there. Weapons are no different than cigarettes, liquor, radios, TVs, and surface-to-air missiles, shoulder-fired missiles, rifles, ammunition. All of this is going to make its way to the black market. Maybe not all of it, but a good significant portion of it. It's certainly not going to find its way to the front lines. And it's going to be in the hands of people who can actually do Americans harm in other parts of the world.
Look, Larry's 100% correct. We're dealing with one of the most corrupt nations on the planet. The last time I was in Ukraine was in 1997. I went there as a UN inspector. My job was to coordinate with the Ukrainian National Security Council and their Ministry of Defense on certain Ukrainian individuals who were dismantling defense industry and selling missile production capability on the black market. This wasn't theoretical. They were doing it, which means that they would go into a factory, they would dismantle production equipment, they would box it up, come up with a cover story, take it to the airport or take it to a port, and ship it out of the country to an intermediate location where it would sit in a warehouse before it was bartered off. If you can send out the ability to manufacture the guidance and control equipment of an SA-2 surface-to-air missile, you can ship out a Javelin missile. You can ship out a whole bunch of Javelin missiles. Ukraine is one giant black market. Always has been, and unless something fundamentally changed, it always will be. And not only that, now we have a class of people in Ukraine that aren't just the oligarchs making money. We're talking about now a criminal class, the Nazis. And the Nazis have reinforced themselves by emptying the prisons and forming, for instance, in Kharkiv, 3 battalions of national defense people who all came from prison. If you're trying to tell me that a guy who's been sentenced to 15 to 20 years for assault or armed robbery suddenly is filled with patriotic spirit, I'd say you're high. He's on the street not looking how to kill Russians, but looking how to make a buck. And he knows how to make a buck. He knows that if I steal things, because this is the guy who smuggled cigarettes, smuggled liquor, smuggled women, worst kind of people. He's now going to smuggle javelins and stingers out of Ukraine into the existing market. And one of these days, in the not too distant future, there's going to be a Javelin missile fired in Western Europe at a car carrying a high-profile target. There's going to be a Stinger missile fired at an airliner, and it's going to bring down an airliner. It's going to kill hundreds of people. And you know who's to blame? Joe Biden, Lloyd Austin, Anthony Blinken, and all these other people who have allowed these shipments to take place without even having the integrity to do what Rand Paul, the senator from Kentucky, asked. At least appoint an inspector general. At least appoint somebody who can tell us how this is going to be accounted for, what happened to it. You know why they didn't appoint it? Because they know they won't be able to account for it. They know it's going into a black hole. So, that's that. This is bad stuff. This is bad juju. I'm just going to shift real quick just to address something that, Larry, I agree with you. You and I both know how much time it takes to train a professional warrior. We know that. But I think we can agree that Ukraine started with 260,000 of them. And the Russians haven't killed 260,000.
Correct.
So when Russia takes out, for instance, a Ukrainian armor brigade, they destroy most of the equipment. They kill a certain percentage, maybe 5, 8%, maybe 10% of the personnel, wound another. But there's going to be 70, 80% of that brigade that comes out alive, trained. And what's happening here is instead of falling back onto a Ukrainian training base, which is subjected to caliber attacks, these personnel are being broken down into company-sized elements and being sent to Germany, sent to Poland to receive 40, 30, 40, 60-day training packets on heavy equipment. Now, these are professionals. For instance, if I'm a Ukrainian artilleryman who knows how to fire 122 millimeter artillery, I know the basics of artillery, and I've done it in combat already, which means I'm probably more qualified than the people training me. I'm going to go, I can be trained by a U.S. Army expert on artillery at the Grafenwohr artillery range in West Germany, a very good artillery range, using a training packet that's been broken down into just the fundamentals of this piece of equipment. They don't have to teach me to march. They don't have to teach me to salute. They don't have to teach me to shave. They don't have to teach me to fire a piece of artillery. They just have to train me on the operational use of this weapon and some basic maintenance. And you could do that in 40 days. That's what I meant by operational depth. Now, can they do this indefinitely? No, because they're going to come back. They're going to be organized into a battery or a battalion. They're going to go to the front line. And within a certain period of time, they're going to be destroyed again. Now, you're not going to kill all these people. You're going to destroy them. They're going to come back. They're going to, and how many times can they cycle through before they're incapable of going through that? We don't know the answer to. But the point is that they're not, actually we do know the answer because already the Ukrainians are coming out, and in their most recent draft, they're separating people with technical skills, meaning that if you need a tank driver, they want to get a heavy equipment operator and say, all right, we need you to come because you're going to have to drive a tank, but we don't have time to teach you all the Army stuff. You got to come with some basic skills. So when we send you to Poland to fall in on these T-72s, you can absorb the training. So it appears they're already running out of the trained people that we spoke of, and they're starting to go into the next category. But you're right. You can't take Joe Schmo Joe Schmoleski off the street put him into a 40-day training program about the M777 and expect him to perform competently. You can't. But I don't think that's what's happening right now. In fact, the French have said that the Ukrainians that they received were some of the most professional artillerymen they've ever met. These are the guys who went to the south of France. U.S. Army has spoken similarly of the Ukrainians that have been receiving training. So the guys who are getting the training in this strategic depth are professional soldiers who know what they're doing and are able to bring maximum value to the equipment being provided. This will not last indefinitely. And at some point in time, we will hit that transition point where exactly what you say is going to happen. You're going to bring in people who cannot absorb this equipment. Therefore, when the equipment makes it to Ukraine, it's a death trap or it's junk.
So I see some of the comments coming in are just exactly that, comments, but some are questions that might be worth addressing. I want to see if both of you might have a few more minutes to spend with us to possibly address a couple of questions. Do you both have a few more minutes?
Well, I mean, this is so divisive, and Larry and I are just going at it so hard. I don't know.
I've been calling him names. We're ready to punch each other.
Oh,
well,
I'm ready. I know how to make. I know how to make.
I go down.
I know how to make it more divisive. And while I'm doing that, I'll ask Peta if you could just find a couple of questions that seem particularly interesting that would be worth addressing. And while you're doing that, I invited both gentlemen before this started to tell me if there's anything that they want me to ask or say. And Larry declined the offer. Scott, however, identified a couple of things from a March interview that Larry did with Mike Whitney, and he wanted to confront me about that. So here's the divisive part. From a March interview with Mike Whitney, Scott was saying that he thinks Larry was wrong about this. Larry wrote, "We have not seen a single instance of a Ukrainian regiment or brigade-such unit attacking and defeating a comparable Russian unit. Instead, the Russians have split the Ukrainian army into fragments and cut their lines of communication. The Russians are consolidating their control of Mariupol and have secured all approaches on the Black Sea. Ukraine is now cut off in the south and the north." What did Larry get wrong, Scott?
I think that the Ukrainians have shown, and first of all, if you had asked me that question in early March, I would have said the same thing, that the Russians appear to have degraded the command and control, and that Ukraine has lost the ability to maneuver large-scale formations. But that's not the case today. The battlefield is no longer a fluid battlefield. It's a very static battlefield with well-defined front lines. And the Ukrainians have shown an ability to reconstitute large-scale formations of brigade size and move them as divisional elements to selected places on the battlefield where they have engaged the Russians in counterattacks. Most of these counterattacks fail. Some of them have succeeded in compelling the Russians to pull back because the Ukrainians, using the intelligence provided, have picked a soft spot, usually reserve units or units that, like we did during the Battle of the Bulge. We put American units on the units that taking casualties. We put them on part of the front line that we said would be the most quiet. So the Russians had put some units on the front line thinking it would be quiet, and the Ukrainians are attacking, and they have had success. Again, it doesn't fundamentally change the outcome. In fact, it actually makes it ultimately easier to kill Ukrainians, because one of the things the Russians are really good at is counterattacking. And so the Ukrainians often always overextend themselves, and then the Russians come back with a vengeance and wipe them out. But I just think that kind of blanket statement is deceiving, because the Ukrainians are pretty good. They're professionals. And when you have professionals and you combine the will and you give them the means, they usually find the way. And they have found the way on several occasions, north of Kharkov, down in Kherson, less so in the Donbass, because that's a much more difficult fight. But on the extremes of the Russian flanks, where the Russians have thinned out their troops, the Ukrainians have shown an ability to mass forces and carry out limited counterattacks that have defeated the Russians. Not decisively, but I mean, withdrawing, retreating, some people call that a defeat.
All right, Larry, does he have a point?
No, well, yeah, he has a point. But what the point I was making is I draw parallels with Stalingrad. The German von Paulus was surrounded ultimately by Soviet troops. What did the Germans do? The Germans tried to break through with an organized attack to try to breach the Soviet lines. They failed. but at least they put together a unit and tanks and a whole organized army to go in to try to rescue von Paulus. What happened to the guys in the Azov battalion? There was no such breakthrough, not even an attempt. So my point was that and Scott's correct in noting that, yeah, they've been reinforcing these defensive positions. And from those defensive positions, they can take back a few kilometers of territory here and there. But in massing their forces like that, they are creating a big fat target for Russia just to pound the crap out of. And so it is, I think I've found a real prejudice in the West against the Russian military. And I think it's dangerous because they say, oh, they're a bunch of drunks. But we had 3 cadets from West Point go down and sniff coke and go to the hospital in Miami. Does that apply to the whole Army? I know Scott as Marine would say yes, but that's a whole other Believe me, I was mentored for 3 years at State Department by a retired Marine colonel who was like my second father. So I know whereof I speak. But the point is that I literally have heard CIA analysts and military analysts who should know better, and this is within the last 6 months, oh, that Russian army, they're just a bunch of drunks. That is stupid and dangerous and so misinformed. And if we continue to make that mistake to just completely ridicule and not recognize the quality of military force that the Russians are, because this battle they are conducting over that 600-mile-long front is extremely complex, requires a massive logistics support, and frankly, the United States hasn't done anything like this since maybe Vietnam, and we didn't do it too damn well in Vietnam.
No,
it's not just the soldiers. Russia is demonized in every way, basically.
Yeah. Well, let me put it this way. Right now, and I've heard this from several military professionals who look at this with an unbiased fashion. The finest battalion commanders in the world right now are the Russian battalion commanders fighting in Ukraine. They are the most tactically competent. They are brutally efficient, and they're just very effective leaders. They're combat tested. These guys went in. Some of them made mistakes early on, but they've learned. And to watch a Russian battalion go into action in a coordinated combined arms action, supported by brigade elements, etc., is just a work of art. And the U.S. has no equivalent. Our battalion commanders today were company commanders in Iraq and Afghanistan. They have no clue what's going on in Ukraine. They don't know how to fight that kind of fight. They've never been trained to fight that kind of fight. When they go to the National Training Center, until recently, they were carrying out low-intensity conflict simulations. So the concept that they would go up against an enemy capable of firing 6,000 artillery tubes, which is the Ukrainians, no, we couldn't do it. But you know who the second best battalion commanders are in the world today? Ukrainians, not the nationalists, not the Azov guys. I'm talking about the professional military guys. They have. Larry's right. When Larry made that quote, Mariupol, the battle was going, and the Ukrainians had nothing to come to their assistance, nothing, because they had been eviscerated, slaughtered. But what was happening while that was going on is that guys were in France, guys are in Germany, guys were in Poland being trained. And after Mariupol fell, after the Russians pulled out, these new brigades started coming to the front line. And they have had an impact. These are combat-hardened Ukrainian battlefield commanders at the brigade and battalion level who are very, very good. And you don't take it from me. Ask the Russians. The Russians will tell you they're pretty damn good. Want to know why they know they're good? Because if the Russians make a mistake, they get killed. These guys, what the Ukrainians are really good at? Pre-registered artillery ambushes. They're very good at creating a situation on the battlefield and then letting the Russians get sucked in a little too far and then hitting them with a pre-registered artillery ambush that inflicts a lot of casualties. Now, the Russians have learned. They now do a more appropriate reconnaissance. They're a lot less aggressive in terms of rushing forward. It's a more methodical battle. The Russians learned that you don't have to take 20 kilometers in a day to win. You only have to take 2. And then do it 10 days later. You're at the same objective with far fewer casualties. So that's the way the Russians are operating now. But the Ukrainians are pretty good. They're very professional. You know who's not good and not professional? Anybody in the U.S. Army today. And frankly speaking, anybody in the U.S. Marine Corps today. We don't know how to fight this kind of fight. And the arrogance of, our professional military class to sit here and denigrate the Russians, hopefully they'll never have to fight the Russians on the battlefield. But I'll tell you right now, Russia has the finest combat seasoned military the world has seen in a long time. They're very lethal. They're very dangerous. They're very well equipped. Everybody's saying they're going to run out of tanks. They ain't never going to run out of tanks. They're going to run out of artillery. Nope. They're going to run out of ammunition. In your lifetime. They're going to run out of fuel. Nope. They got it all. They have a logistics plan. Not only that, now they are in sole control of the battlefield. Larry will appreciate this. That they send their battalion in, and it'll hook and jab for a couple of days. This is intense combat. This is real stuff. They'll go in and fight, and then that battalion will be withdrawn into the rear where the soldiers get a hot meal. They get a hot shower. They get to sleep in a nice sleeping bag, not worry about things going boom, while their equipment is being maintained by some of the best combat mechanics the world has ever seen, so that when they're ready to go again next time, they've absorbed whatever new equipment, reinforcements they need, they go back in and they rotate back out. The next unit goes back. Guess who's not doing that? The Ukrainians. They've spent 100 days on the front line. These guys are tired. They're hungry. They're exhausted. They're making bad decisions because of the exhaustion, and they're demoralized because they're getting slaughtered. It's something to wake up in the morning and find out that every man to your left and right is dead because the artillery came in, and that's that. It's something to think that you're holding the front line to find out that the Russians have outflanked you and they're hitting you with fire from every direction, and you have no choice but to surrender or die. That's the daily reality of thousands of Ukrainian troops. Whereas the Russians are, again, guys on the front line are fighting the Ukrainians. Ukrainians are a determined foe. But in 3 days, they get to go back and rest. They get to go back and smoke cigarettes, play the harmonica, play the accordion, write letters home, get on. They get their cell phones back from their commanders, and they get to call home and speak to their wives and their moms. Then they have to give the cell phones back. That's why anytime you hear, the Ukrainians have intercepted the communications of Russians calling home from the front. Oh, they have it, because the Russians are really, really good. And the first thing the commander does before he goes in the front line, he calls all his boys together, and he and the NCO go around and they shake them down and they take all their personal electronics. And it goes into a bag and it don't go to the front line. That's how good the Russians are. But anyways, we're talking about some of the best combat troops in the world, and the United States and NATO need to wake up. You think a conscript army from Poland is going to be able to stand toe-to-toe with these guys? No. You think the Danish, the Dutch, the Germans, this ain't the Wehrmacht. This ain't even the Bundeswehr from the Cold War. These are your modern woke Germans who don't know how to fight and won't fight.
Scott, can I ask you a question in that vein? There's a lot of people, and there's been a lot of talk about what could potentially happen, NATO getting dragged into the war and all. What is your assessment in terms of how ready is NATO in terms of posture, position, logistics? Are they ready to fight today? And if not, how long would it get them ready to really do something?
First of all, NATO's not ready to fight today. They have a handful of units. For instance, in the Baltics, they've deployed what they call battle groups, which are reinforced battalions. And they're in the Baltics. They have extremely limited defensive combat capability. They're totally incapable of offensive operations. First of all, to think a reinforced battalion is going to carry out independent offensive operations against the Russians is no, not going to happen. The Polish army can barely get out of the barracks. What units they have might be able to provide a credible defense in depth against any Russian attack, but the concept of the Poles being able to go on the offensive into Ukraine, non-existent. Same thing to the Romanians. NATO has zero offensive capability. People say, well, what about the U.S. Army? What about the U.S. Army? You think the 82nd Airborne is going out of the offensive in Poland? Think again. You think the Stryker brigade that they send there is going to go on the offensive? No, its job is large-scale screening operations for a division-sized heavy armored force, which we don't have. We do have a couple heavy armored brigades. But we've been talking about artillery all day. How many artillery pieces does a U.S. Army heavy artillery brigade have? And the answer is 18. All right, so no, the U.S. Army can't fight the Russians. We're not capable of fighting the Russians. NATO's not capable of fighting the Russians. And to make matters worse, whatever stockpiles, one of the things that's come out of this war is how ammunition intensive it is. I mean, the Ukrainians have used up, and they had huge amounts of Soviet era stockpiles. So the Ukrainians were able to draw upon stockpiles that the Soviet Union had prepared for a war against NATO. So we're talking about months worth of ammunition stored up. That's all gone. It's all gone. It's finished. They've been destroyed by the Russians or used by the Ukrainians. Now the Ukrainians need more ammunition. The Russians are, shooting 60,000 rounds a day. That's more than we fired in the entire Desert Storm. That's per day. And Russia just said, the head of the Donetsk Republic said, we're prepared to continue this fight through the end of the year. Now, I'm a Marine, so my math skills are pretty tough. But July, August, September, October, November, December, 6 months, 6 times 30, 180 times 60,000. That's a whole bunch of ammunition, and they wouldn't be making this commitment unless they had that ammunition and more ready on hand to fight this war. Russia went to war prepared for the fight. They have the logistics for the fight. NATO doesn't. NATO doesn't have any logistics. If NATO went to war today, let's say everything functioned perfectly, they'd be out of ammunition in a week. They'd be out of fuel in 2 weeks. And then what? The vaunted Air Force? Ask the U.S. Air Force how many air-to-air missiles we have on hand in Europe today. Not that many. Ask them how many we have in the United States ready to be shipped over to Europe. Not that many. Why? We haven't been fighting the air-to-air fight for a long time. And we're not prepared to fight the air-to-air fight. You know who is? Russia. They got a lot of airplanes. They got a lot of air-to-air missiles. Yeah, we may come out in the beginning of the fight and knock down more of their planes than they knock down of ours. But when we run out of missiles, we lose the war. When our airfields cease to function, we lose the war. And if we ever try to put an F-35 in the air, we lose the war because they ain't going to fly. It's going to break, and it's just going to sit on the ground as a multi-million-dollar piece of junk. The Russians know what they're doing. They know what they're doing. They know how to do it. NATO doesn't. NATO has not been, this is not the NATO of your father or grandfather. This is not NATO circa 1985 with, capability of putting 1.5 million men, highly trained men, well-equipped men on the front line ready to fight now at the drop of a hat. No, this is the joke NATO. This is the woke NATO. This is the NATO that got their butts handed to them in Afghanistan. This is the NATO that couldn't organize their way out of a paper bag. And you expect them to fight Russia? It's not just me saying this. You know who knows this is the truth? NATO. They're scared to death because Ukraine is going to lose this war. And in the process, eat up a significant portion of NATO's strategic depth, their ammunition stockpiles, their equipment. Ask the Canadians how much ammunition they have right now. None. Canada can't go to war because they don't have anything to go to war with. The same thing, if NATO provides all of this material to Ukraine that they're asking for, NATO won't have anything to go to war with, even if they could fight. So no, NATO knows this is problematic. This is why the Russian victory, and it is going to be a Russian victory of decisive scope, is going to force NATO to have a come to Jesus moment. I'd like to be a fly on the wall on the NATO summit coming up at the end of this month, because I can guarantee you that what they're going to be talking about ain't what they thought they were going to be talking about a month ago. A month ago, they were talking about victory. Now they're talking about the absolute defeat of Ukraine and the embarrassment of NATO.
Okay, so before we wrap things up, I wanted to try to get to a couple of questions from the audience. So I'll make the same request to you, Larry, and you, Scott, as I did at the beginning, which is please keep the answer brief, maybe a minute or so we can try to get to at least a couple or so questions before we bring this to a close. And Peter, I'm going to ask you if you can find a couple of good questions. Here's one now. Scott, do you think the remains of Ukraine will merge with Poland to create a new country, something like Polsocrania?
I know there's many in Poland who want that to happen, but you need to understand that the Western Ukrainians hate Poles. They treat them as subhumans. At the end of the Second World War, they killed 150,000 of them. So there's no love lost between the two. And the other thing is that it would require Europe to give in to the redrawing of maps, which is something Europe said they're never going to do at the end of the Second World War. Once you start redrawing lines, where do you stop? Germany says it wants Silesia back. So no, I don't think that's going to happen.
Okay, here's a question for Larry. I have a question to Larry. What is Finnish Minister of Interior from the Green Party planning, talking to hire refugees to hybrid operations? I'm not sure I can decipher that. Do you understand that question?
I have no idea. I know the only good thing that Finland's doing for Europe is one of their major exports is wood. And with the cutoff of Russian natural gas, that will come in handy in building fires to stay warm come winter.
Okay. Russia takes all the territory they want. Then what? Ukraine and Europe building military strength, constant attack on the new Russian territory. Will Russia bomb Ukraine into surrendering?
I don't think so. I mean, look, Russia has fought a different kind of war than what we in the West had become accustomed to doing. Our shock and awe campaign, where basically we'd go around and beat up on the kids in wheelchairs, bombing the Iraqis, bombing the Syrians, bombing the Afghanis. They didn't have air forces. They didn't have significant air defense. But boy, we could bomb the crap out of them. And yet Russia, in this engagement, instead of destroying all the infrastructure, leveling the cities, making it just a smoking pile of rubble, has been very select in trying to avoid civilian casualties, trying to keep infrastructure intact. So it is, we in the West can't wrap our minds around somebody treating in a war, trying to be humane, when we've been so inhumane over the last 50 years. And okay, I'm anti-American for saying that, but screw them. My family, I had 28 family members that fought in the American Revolution, so I got some pedigree to talk about this. And it's
at least you don't write for RT.
Yeah, I've done that in the past. That's a whole nother story. But this is. Russia is going to take the steps necessary to protect Russia and to try to preserve what it can of Ukraine, but it's going to be a Ukraine. It's not going to Ukraine with a knife.
All right, we have a question from Scott's dog. What was that? All right, Pat, anything else you can get rid of that question?
Ukraine is not going to be in position to bomb anybody. When this war is over, it's because Ukraine will have surrendered unconditionally, and one of the conditions would be the Ukrainian military will no longer exist, not as it's currently configured. All the equipment it's receiving will either be destroyed or turned over to the Russians. I mean, that's the other thing that the U.S. taxpayer needs to understand, that these billions of dollars worth of equipment that we're sending, we're not getting any of it back. It's all either going to be destroyed or, how's it going to look when the Donetsk People's Republic have their Victory Day parade next year, and they have miles long, parade of nothing but captured Western equipment, because that's what's going to happen. So everything we're sending Ukraine is either going to be destroyed or captured. And this is billions of dollars. And I just want the people of Flint, Michigan, who still have water problems, to say, why aren't you spending that money on fixing my problems? Why aren't you fixing my problems in the inner city in New York City, fixing the New York City subway, fixing Amtrak, fixing Chicago? There's a lot of places we could spend tens of billions of dollars on here in America that make a heck of a lot more sense than throwing it away in a losing cause with a nation and a government that's not worthy of our support. And I know I said, but I'm going to say it because I feel so strongly about this. Every American that questions what we're doing in Ukraine, go to a cemetery that contains the remains of World War II veterans. Then go to the graves of those veterans who died flying B-17 bombers over Germany, who hit the beaches in Normandy, who fought in the Battle of the Bulge and elsewhere, and sit there and reflect on the fact that these men who gave their lives in defense of the United States against the most odious form of ideology in modern history, National Socialism as practiced by Adolf Hitler, why are we spending U.S. taxpayer money supporting neo-Nazis in Ukraine today? That's a fair question. Every American needs to ask that question. And every American needs to demand an answer. If the answer is, I don't know why are we supporting Nazis, then we shouldn't be sending any money to Ukraine.
All right, we seem to have lost Larry, and we should probably bring things to a close soon anyway, but why don't we at least try to get to this question, and we'll see if Larry returns. Maybe he's having an internet problem or some such thing. Question from the audience: what's up with the missing Canadian general? You know anything about that, Scott?
Depends whose jurisdiction he's in. If he's in Russian jurisdiction, I'm sure he's in the Lubyanka being interrogated right now. This was a man who was in line to be the commander of all Canadian forces. He knows a lot about everything. So I think he's a critical intelligence resource, and I'm sure he's being interrogated right now. If he's in the hands of the Donetsk People's Republic, then he will be tried as a war criminal in the Mariupol Military Tribunal, and he will be found guilty, and he will be sentenced to death. Whether they implement that, nothing. But this man is an extraordinary intelligence resource, and I would imagine that the Russians have taken over the interrogation.
Sorry about that. I had a computer glitch.
We figured you didn't get pissed off. If nothing prior got you pissed off, that wouldn't have been it.
Yeah, Scott left me emotionally distraught. I had to go in my corner and cry.
I'm sorry, Larry. I'm sorry. Now you know how I feel after playing around the golf with you. So
I have mixed feelings about this harmony. You know, on one hand, I'd like to show the public how it's possible to disagree without it deteriorating. On the other hand, it would have been good for ratings. And I had a secret weapon, which Larry knows about because he came on earlier. In case things got a little too heated, I said, well, I know that there's somebody that we can all bond over to mock in case we needed it. And it was this guy here.
This country fight, what essentially is a war.
Thanks, Jeff.
Okay. What a clown show. I was supposed to be on a talk show once with him, and he chickened out, coward that he is. I mean, he's completely misrepresented his special operations career. I mean, it's just nonsense.
But we know the caliber missiles are fired every 30 seconds. Every 30 seconds.
Stand by.
Stand by. Okay.
If all else fails, it's always fun to mock mountaineers. All right. Well, I want to thank you guys very much. It was really a great chat. Scott and I have been friends for a long time, and now I'd like to think that Larry and I are new friends. I like Larry, don't you, Scott?
I've always liked Larry. I don't have a problem with Larry. I have a problem with Gonzalo Lira.
I don't know how many times you guys have actually hung out together. I mean, you've talked about playing golf. I mean, have you hung out very much over the years, or you just?
I think that was it. That was the only time we've quote unquote hung out. We've talked over the time. We've had phone calls and stuff like that, but no, we've just the one time playing golf, and he beat me so badly that I just refused to ever engage again.
He's been overly modest, but I've always respected Scott against he stood up at a time when it was very difficult to stand up to say to throw the bullshit whistle and flag.
Indeed. Yeah, I think we all respect Scott very much for that.